Stories contain the very seeds of freedom. When our stories and legends are adapted for new generations by powerful forces, it is not to make accessible material, but rather to remove the purpose and the heart of the story. And it is this heart that creates new nations, new revolutions against old tyrannies. And, in the longest, darkest night, it is the stories that will see us through to the dawn. All this and more on The Rabbit Hole, Politics and Prose, a LibertyNation.com production. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. Welcome to The Rabbit Hole. When we talk of a rebellious spirit, or a nation born in revolution, for many of us, our minds automatically jump to the birth of the United States. It is indeed one of the greatest stories of our time. And from this story, Americans and many others in different parts of the world take into their hearts what it means to be a free people. But there are other countries that also have the born-in-struggle narrative woven into the fabric of their societies. Today, I want to talk about a country that we often consider to be one made on the basis of bureaucracy and regulation. A country so enamored with the idea of societal rules and norms that it's easy to forget that it is and was a nation with revolution in its soul. I'm talking about China, the Middle Kingdom, and I intend to show you how it is stories, wonderful legends from hundreds or even thousands of years ago that keep the human spirit alive in even the most regulated and disciplined of places. And perhaps this is something that we in the West can hold on to, because our stories, much like those of the ancient land, also contain the seeds of freedom and revolution. They're just a little more obvious and open. The Chinese mentality, in much the same way as the Western mentality, is rooted in earlier writers and thinkers. We in the West can lay claim to a moral heritage through Plato and others of the ancient Greek world, and our friends in the East, they too have similar roots. You've no doubt heard of Confucianism. Now, Confucius was what we would today call a civil servant in high places. He was an official, a bureaucrat, and he laid the foundations for the next 2,500 years of Chinese thought and formality. Born around 551 BC, he essentially codified what it meant to be a good citizen, and this school of thought has endured the millennia. At the heart of his writings was the idea of respect for authority, always obeying the family, never being the loud voice in the quiet room. And these are all things that lead to elements of control over the population. But it's worth remembering that a single man cannot codify an enormous nation in one lifetime. It was likely that these ideas, his analects as they were known, were already an integral part of the fabric of Chinese life. What he really did was lay them down to be picked up by later generations. We see his teachings today in how the Chinese folk interact with each other and the systems of power that are in place. Having spent much of my own adult life in China, I could see it everywhere. What comes across as respect for the teacher, respect for local and national leaders, may at first seem as though the Chinese people are an almost cowed race, a subservient nation. This is not the reality. There's an undercurrent in China of liberty that from the outside is rarely seen. While outwardly observing the norms of culture, inside they have a very different narrative. And it's this narrative that is the B-roll to their daily lives. It's always playing along, almost as a parallel track that is hidden just below the surface, a secret code woven in. And this comes from the stories they are taught in childhood. I'm going to tell you one story today. It's known as Liang Ju, which are the names of the protagonists, but it also has a more memorable name, the Butterfly Lovers. It's a sad story in many ways, but it contains some elements that may be familiar to you. And these show that the stories are almost archetypal. The Butterfly Lovers is now acknowledged as one of China's 4 great folk tales, which shows how popular it still is. The story follows the youngest child of the wealthy Ju family, Ju Ying-tai. She's a determined young girl who manages to convince her father that she should attend school. At the time the story is set, girls are forbidden from attending the palaces of higher education, so Ying-tai decides that the only way she'll get an education is to dress as a boy. Her father agrees, essentially because she's the ninth child of the family and the only girl. So in many ways, she's quite disposable in that culture at that time. Anyway, her father agrees and off she sets down to Hangzhou. But on her journey, she meets Liang Shanbo, who is also going to Hangzhou to study. And here's the thing. She's dressed as a boy and he has no idea that she's not, but they become close almost immediately. There's a Chinese phrase that means you meet a new friend, it already feels like you're with an old friend. You're so comfortable together. And it's this feeling that springs up between Ying Tai and Shanbo. They continue the journey together and remain fast friends or sworn brothers for the next few years. And as they study together, Ying Tai gradually falls in love with Shanbo. But Shanbo, he's a real bookworm and completely fails to notice that Ying Tai is actually female. So on one side, there's this unrequited love, and on the other, there's the unexamined love. Things are going well with their studies when a message arrives. It's Ying Tai's father. He commands her to pack up her things and return home as soon as possible. Naturally, Ying Tai is saddened, so she confesses to the headmaster's wife that she's actually a girl and that she's fallen in love with Shanbo. She passes over her jade pendant for the matronly woman to give to Shanbo, so he'll finally realize that she loves him. And then she sets off. Now Shanbo, knowing that he'll miss his friend, walks with her for the first 18 or so miles. And on this walk, Ying Tai, she tries to hint to him that she's actually a girl. She drops some quite obvious clues, like comparing them both to a couple of mandarin ducks wandering down a lane, which is a Chinese emblem of lovers. He's such an innocent, though, so he just doesn't get it. Ying Tai, she's decided that she wants to be with Shanbo, so she says she'll matchmake for him and set him up with her sister, and tells him, obviously she has no sisters, and tells him to come visit her as soon as he can, to ask the lucky sister to marry him. Perhaps unsurprisingly, things don't go to plan. It turns out that Ying Tai's father called her back to marry the son of a wealthy merchant family. These are not good people. And she, being the daughter, being Chinese and living in that time, has to obey the wishes of her family. But a short time before the wedding takes place, Shanbo comes calling, and by now, of course, he knows that she's a girl and that she loves him, and to his surprise, he realizes that he loves her too. They meet in secret and profess their love for each other, making a vow similar to until death do us part. But they are part of the society, and so the marriage must go ahead. Shanbo, suffering from a broken heart, he starts wasting away, he falls ill and eventually dies. And then comes the day of the wedding. The wedding procession, they're moving along the road on the way to the temple when they walk past the tomb of Shanbo. A great wind comes and makes them stop. They literally can't go any further, the wind is so strong. Ying Tai, she goes over to Shanbo's tomb to pay her respects and to say goodbye. When all of a sudden, the tomb bursts open. Ying Tai, she doesn't hesitate. She throws herself into the tomb, which seals behind her. The wedding guests are all looking on, not knowing what to do or what to say. When out of the tomb fly two colourful butterflies, beautifully enamored with each other. They fly away, never to be separated again. This story, a story that has survived all the purges of the Cultural Revolution and more than 1,000 years of state control, is set against the backdrop of something familiar to all Chinese. They must obey their parents, they must obey the cultural norms and do what's expected of them. But it also teaches us, perhaps subversively, that regardless of what is expected, regardless of who commands us, there is always the chance of love and freedom if we are willing to pay the price. It may be regarded as just a story of star-crossed lovers doomed by the family and societal rules never to be together, surely reminiscent of Romeo and Juliet here, but on a deeper level, it speaks of freedom, it speaks of liberty, and of making the choices that you, in your heart of hearts, know that you must make, consequence be damned. And this is why stories and legends are so valuable, perhaps even more so than artifacts or buildings, and yes, even our founding documents that we venerate as the basis for our civil societies. It's the stories that are passed on with an almost subversive yet innate understanding to the next generation. They're the lessons that we can teach when even speech and morality is policed and controlled. These grand myths each contain the seeds of the tree of liberty, and they're far more forceful over time than any laws or societal norms, because they sit in our hearts, they wait, they grow, and we look to them on a subconscious level in our darkest hours. They are the base spirit that can never be broken, so we must pass on our stories, our legends, and our myths, and in every way, we must try to keep them as pure as they were as when they were first written. Is it any surprise that childhood tales nowadays, they're being rewritten with a modern slant? It's not to make it more appealing to a modern generation. Many of these root stories have survived for thousands of years through countless new generations without any help from an overreaching government. It seems almost that when stories are rewritten, when they're repurposed in modern society, it's not to create a more active experience for the modern child, but rather to remove the power that's inherent within each and every one of these old tales, these old narratives. Protecting these stories is protecting the future. For when the tree of liberty is cut down, it is only in the roots that hope resides.
Thank you for listening to The Rabbit Hole, Politics and Prose, a LibertyNation.com production. Join us next episode, where we'll be talking more history, politics, legends and stories. Until next time, thanks for listening.